A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda ki jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinatha Shyama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan ki jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Mayapur Dham ki jai. Jagannath Puri ki jai. Ganga Mai ki jai. Jamuna Mai ki jai. Tulsi Maharani ki jai. Bhakti Devi ki jai. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Today we're continuing the reading of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, Volume 3, Chapter 3, New Jagannath Puri. And today we'll find out why the chapter is named New Jagannath Puri. But before we start reading, after each class we get some feedback from the worldwide audience. And last week, you remember that we had heard about Upendra Prabhu. Satsvarup Maharaj had introduced Upendra into Prabhupada's group of disciples. So after Upendra became the personal servant of Srila Prabhupada, he did a lot of preaching. He went to Australia, he went to Fiji, he remained as Prabhupada's personal servant whenever Prabhupada needed him. And one of the devotees that he encouraged to become a disciple was Jagatarini Mataji. So her daughter, Lalita Manjari, she's a disciple of Satsvarup Maharaj, she wrote to me more about Upendra, because I didn't know how Upendra ended up leaving his body in Australia. I didn't know what happened to Upendra after Prabhupada disappeared. So she filled in all that information and gave us a very interesting story. So I'm going to read the things that she sent to me on WhatsApp with corresponding pictures so we can get a full picture of all the wonderful service that Upendra did for Srila Prabhupada before we start today's Prabhupada Lilamrita class. So this was sent by Lalita Manjari, the daughter of Burijan and Jagatarini. And she's quoting from a 2007 Back to Godhead article. Upendra Das, also a former personal servant of Srila Prabhupada and a pioneer of Krishna consciousness in Australia, had left the Association of Devotees and was near death in San Francisco. So where Upendra joined, after Srila Prabhupada left this world, Upendra was right there with Prabhupada when he entered Samadhi here in Vrindavan. After that, he returned to America and he left the Association of Devotees. Kurmadas from Australia raised money so that Upendra could pass away with his old devotee friends at the New Govardhan farm in Australia. Kurma describes the flight and ensuing events. Upendra ended up going into a coma and almost dying on the plane. The United Airlines flight to Sydney was almost forced to make an emergency landing on the way. He stayed in intensive care in a major Sydney hospital for over 2 weeks. His health improved enough for him to move up to the farm that's in Murwillumbah in New South Wales in Australia, New Govardhan, where the many devotees looked after him until his departure a few months later. At the time of his passing, Jayadvaita Swami suddenly arrived on the farm. He was rushed up the hill to the house, where a resounding kirtan was in full force, and he took over leading the kirtan. As Upendra gazed at a picture of Gaur Nitai held at the foot of his bed, he passed away peacefully. Now this is the interesting part. This is why Lalita Manjari wrote to us. After Upendra passed away in New Govardhan, a friend of my mother's, sent her a tiny 1-inch deity of Krishna in a little pouch that he used to be worshipped by Upendra. And apparently he carried him with him in his bead bag everywhere from when he joined until the end. Either he or my mother named him Gopinath, and my mother has been worshipping, looking after him ever since. Basically, the whole gallery here is due to him. So after Jagatarini received the 1-inch deity of Krishna that Upendra had been worshipping all those years, she started a museum in Perth, Australia. We'll see about that. And the whole museum was centered around this Gopinath deity. And where we stay is named after him, Gopinath Dham. She is very, very attached, and he's played a big role in her life. So Upendra has a connection to her, and here, even now. So the name of her gallery and museum is called the Sacred India Gallery, and even Prime Minister Modi visited it. Anyone who comes to Perth, Australia, they're brought to it because it's a very famous gallery. She's won a lot of awards for miniature museums. So you'll see here in this picture, that's the 1-inch little Gopinath. See that? And everything is built in his size. All of Vrindavan has been recreated. You can see here, this is Nanda Maharaj's palace. Everything is just little 1-inch deities of all of the inhabitants of Vrindavan. And this is all because of Upendra's one little deity of Gopinath. Upendra was the first to teach her how to put on a sari. So in those days, we didn't have many girls joining. So when girls joined, sometimes the boys had to teach them how to put saris on. In fact, even in Denver, when Akuti joined, Jaipataka taught her how to put on a sari. So with brothers and sisters like that. So Upendra, he taught Jagatarini how to put a sari on. And after she met him in Balimardan in Sydney, while starting as an actress, she became an actress. She was in the movies with Mick Jagger, a big Rolling Stones singer, and then we'll read about it. And was stopping in LA, that's Los Angeles, on her way to further her career in London. Upendra strongly encouraged her to visit the LA temple as Srila Prabhupada was there. And then she joined in Los Angeles. I was visiting Melbourne in 1996 when there was some special Srila Prabhupada event, and the devotees invited Upendra for that. I remember seeing him then. He was already sick, and that visit reconnected him to the Australian yatra. And not long after returning back to the United States, the devotees brought him back to Australia to leave his body there. So after Jagatarini followed Upendra's advice and went to the Los Angeles temple, that was in probably 1969, she joined and she got initiated, and Prabhupada sent her to Hong Kong because Burijan had gone there to open a temple. She had never met Burijan. She was a brand new devotee, and Prabhupada gave Jagatarini his own ring as a wedding ring because he sent her to get married to Burijan. And then Burijan and Jagatarini did so much service after that. We'll read about them in the coming volumes. Okay, so we've heard a little bit more about Upendra now. Now we're going on with the reading. And we had ended, it was a very disastrous part of the Lilamrita. Brahmananda and the other trustees who Prabhupada had put in charge of 26 2nd Avenue, they had come in contact with a real estate agent and a financier who had promised to get a beautiful temple, a brownstone building, in central Manhattan for Srila Prabhupada. And they were very smart, and the devotees were very innocent. And the devotees only had a certain amount of money, and those men knew that. So they tricked the devotees. So here he was, this is Brahmananda, in this big-time financier's office. It was awesome. The millionaires were going to help. Mr. Price, that was the real estate agent, was at Brahmananda's elbow. Mr. Hall, he was the financier, so-called, was telling Brahmananda that everything was all right. We're going to get you this house. Now it was actually going to happen. Here was one of the biggest men in Manhattan offering to help. And whereas Brahmananda had no money, Mr. Hall would be able to pick up the place very easily from the owner. Glancing quickly over the contract, he didn't even read it all, Brahmananda signed. It was a deal. Because you remember Prabhupada had written to Brahmananda that don't give any money unless there's a contract. And don't give the money to anyone except for the owner of the building. So Brahmananda, he was so mesmerized by the big conference hall and the oval table and all of the telephones that we had read about last week and the contract. He was thinking, well, Prabhupada wanted a contract. Here's a contract. It was a deal. And he gave them the check for $5,000. As soon as Brahmananda and Mr. Price left Mr. Hall's office, there was a distinct change in Mr. Price. Although still acting as Brahmananda's friend, he now said, gee, you know, now you have to get this money. As they walked together on the uptown streets, Mr. Price cheerfully pushed the whole thing onto Brahmananda. That was the change. Before, Mr. Price had been saying that he and Mr. Hall were going to do it. They were going to give the money, and then Brahmananda would have to pay them back. But now he said that it was all up to the devotees. Brahmananda asked about the legal position. Mr. Price explained that only the Krishna Society was bound. But what about the promises? What about Mr. Hall's being so rich and wanting to help them, and Mr. Price's wanting to help? Mr. Price assured Brahmananda that he and Mr. Hall did want to help. They were doing everything they could, but Brahmananda and the other devotees should also do everything they could and come up with the $20,000 to complete the down payment by the end of the month. This was the middle of March already, in 1967. And what if they couldn't? Mr. Price made it very clear. If you don't pay the balance in a month, then you lose your deposit. It was a trap. It was a trick. By the time Brahmananda reached 26 2nd Avenue, he realized he had been cheated. He was crushed. He turned to the other devotees and told them what had happened, but they could only return, "Why did you do it?" Brahmananda phoned Srila Prabhupada in San Francisco. Now that his eyes had been opened about Mr. Price, Brahmananda was blunt about his mistake, and he told Prabhupada that he had given away the $5,000. All of it is gone, Srila Prabhupada asked. Yeah, Brahmananda replied. He heard Prabhupada hang up the phone. Brahmananda had been about to explain the whole thing, but Swamiji had just hung up without a word. Brahmananda placed the receiver back on the hook. He was shaken. Now this is what happens when the spiritual master gives instructions to the disciple, and the disciple, out of his naivety, out of his innocence, out of his really wanting to please his spiritual master but not following the instructions, This is how disasters happen. The next day, the trustees held a special meeting. The boys sat around in the front room of Prabhupada's apartment, trying to decide what to do. Gargamuni again called Prabhupada, who advised them to stop the check at the bank. Swamiji's as smart as a fox, Rai Ram smiled. Gargamuni phoned the bank, but it was too late. The check had already been cashed. They were smart. They knew how to trick these innocent young boys. They consulted Mr. Goldsmith, their friendly lawyer. He said it sounded like a weak legal case. Price and Hall hadn't legally bound themselves to pay anything if the devotees failed to pay. And if the devotees couldn't pay the $20,000 balance by the end of the month, they would lose their $5,000 deposit. It was all just a trick to get that money. They could sue for fraud, but court fees would be costly. Then, one by one, Brahmananda, Satsvarup, Kirtanananda, Rai Ram, Gargamuni, and the others began to look at the letters from Prabhupada and discuss how he had warned them to avoid being cheated. Their greatest blunder, they began to realize, was disobeying his instructions. He had told them not to trust the promises of these businessmen, and he had told them that the check should be made only to the owner, not to the financier. So this is the letter where Prabhupada wrote that. It's March 4th, 1967. He wrote it to all of the trustees that we just heard here. My dear boys, please immediately hold a meeting of the trustees of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness and resolve whether $5,000 should immediately be paid to the seller of the house under agreement and as advised by the appointed lawyer, Mr. Seymour Herzog. In my opinion, the check should never be drawn in favor of the financier. So that was the big mistake that they made. The check was in the name of Mr. Hall, the financier. But it should be drawn in the name of original seller, Mr. Taylor. If the financier pays to Mr. Taylor the purchase money, it is then only the above $5,000 should be money paid on behalf of the financier. So Prabhupada was explaining to them why it should only be in the name of the owner of the house. But the boys didn't do that. They listened to Mr. Price, and Mr. Price and Mr. Hall had cheated them. Within a few days, further instructions from their spiritual master came in the mail. There were admonishments, but hearing from him, even if he was chastising them, was better than the pain of his hanging up the phone without a word. But you have not followed my instructions, and now you are in trouble, he wrote to the boys. So this is a part of that letter. But I am very sorry to learn that Mr. Taylor is still playing in his own way. I do not know why. If the financier is paying him all cash, what is the cause of delay? We have already handed over the amount $5,000. So he says here, Prabhupada at the end, I hope you are going to do so, that they're going to take possession of the house immediately. And I may inform you that the possession must be taken on or before the 26th March, 1967, because that is the day of Lord Chaitanya's birthday. You shall observe Lord Chaitanya's birthday as follows. So, Prabhupada, this was going to be 1967. Prabhupada came in 1965, in September. The first, in 1966, March, was Lord Chaitanya's appearance day, but he didn't have any following at that time. Now he had 2 temples, and in this particular letter he gave instructions how to observe Lord Chaitanya's appearance day. We'll hear about that later in the Lilamrita. He wrote to Rai Ram, you are all foolish boys. I repeatedly warn you, even at the last point, that we should not pay the check unless there was agreement between Mr. Tyler and Mr. Hall. The agreement was signed like a marriage ceremony without the presence of the bridegroom. The bridegroom was Mr. Tyler, the owner of the building, and they were giving the money, but there was no bridegroom. The mistake was there, and now you are repenting. So he was writing in the meantime to each one of the trustees. To Satsvarup he wrote, "You have asked me whether the San Francisco branch will pay some money for purchasing the house. But where is your house and where is the purchase? So far it is talks of Mr. Price and Company, in which you innocent boys have been entrapped. I do not know how I can help you in your great blunder. I can only hope that Krishna will help you. Unlike the boys and their lawyers, Prabhupada," so that was the letter. Now we read Satsvarup Maharaj's comment. Prabhupada thought that the legal case against the businessmen would be a strong one. "I am not a lawyer, but this is common sense affair. Mr. Hall has taken the money, and he must finance to purchase the house. If he has no money to finance, then it is a cheating case, clear and simple. The culprits," he said, "should be brought to criminal court. Their conspiracy and fraud were obvious and could be proven. From the telephonic conversation of Brahmananda, it appears to be an organized cheating case, and you have to face with courage without excusing any one of them. We are not revengeful, but we cannot lose Krishna's money for nothing." The boys had already blundered so much that Prabhupada doubted whether they could tackle the cheaters. But he said they had to try. "Let us have the house or return back the money. In default, there is clear case of cheating. Now you can do as you like." So again, Prabhupada's giving the instructions, and it's up to them to follow or not to follow. This is exactly what Krishna did to Arjuna in the Bhagavad-Gita. He gave him the instructions to surrender, and then he said, "Now you do as you like." My point of view is that provided we are getting possession of the house, we shall not lag behind in the matter of all stipulated payments. If we lag behind, we are not going to get back the money, $5,000. We want the house, and we are ready to pay all with all hardship on our part. But if it is a maneuver on the part of Mr. Price, and he's changed the name to Mr. Payne because he was a pain, and his accomplice, Mr. Hill, they must be brought to the criminal court for proper punishment. If, however, we get the money back without a farthing less, we are not going to take any step, even though we can do so legally. Srila Prabhupada wrote the boy's lawyer, relating the history of the case. He also wrote a letter to the financier, the owner, and Mr. Price. See, Prabhupada, he was doing all the work. The boys made the mistake, and now Prabhupada's trying to save them, threatening to expose everything, including what he alone had seen, that the lawyers involved were also implicated. Payment of the next installment of $5,000 is not the issue. The issue is that Mr. Payne has made a false transaction, and Mr. Hill is his accomplice to take the money under the plea of being the financier to purchase the house. I'm not a lawyer, but this is common sense affair. Mr. Hill has taken the money, and he must finance to purchase the house. If he has no money to finance, then it is a cheating case, clear and simple. Mr. Lerner said that he has no money. Therefore, he must be sued along with Payne. But if he is able to finance as per agreement, we are also prepared to pay the balance money. So if Payne comes with the money, I take the responsibility of paying the balance $5,000. Brahmananda could barely understand what was going on, but it appeared that Swamiji was going to get results. The boys were fools, certainly, but the businessmen were certainly cheaters, and Swamiji claimed that he could prove it in court. Now we're up to 28th March. This is after Lord Chaitanya's appearance day. My dear Brahmananda, Satsvarup, Rairam, Gargamuni, Rupanuga, Donald, please accept my blessings. I have received your letter of the 24th March, 1967, and previous to this I received one copy of the letter addressed to M.S. William Alfred White, Incorporated. I have replied Mr. Goldsmith's letter, also giving him the whole history of the cheating business. It is understood that Mr. Goldsmith says the hope of getting back the money is very slim. Under the circumstances, there is no need of pushing good money for the bad. This is a very important rule that Prabhupada gave us, not to put good money on bad money. If already you lost so much money, we don't want to spend more money on that bad money. $6,000 has already become bad money, and therefore no more good money should be spent after this. While admonishing his blundering disciples and going fiercely after the cheaters, Srila Prabhupada still remained the ultimate shelter for his foolish boys. In a letter to the 6 trustees of his New York branch, he shed transcendental light into their gloomy minds. You can imagine the tension that this caused Srila Prabhupada 3,000 miles away, how his disciples had just given away first $1,000 as a down payment, and then, without his approval, another $5,000. And now Prabhupada was trying to patch all this up from the other side of the country. So this is Prabhupada's next instruction to them through letter. Forget the chapter. Take it for granted that Krishna has taken away this money from you for your deliberate foolishness. In future, be very cautious and abide by the orders of Krishna. If you abide by the orders of Krishna, he can give you things that you may need. Be cheerful and chant Hare Krishna without any lamentation. As I have told you several times, that my Guru Maharaj used to say that this world is not a fit place for a gentleman. His version is corroborated by the following verse of Srimad Bhagavatam. It is said like, and then he quotes from his Srimad Bhagavatam, this slok. Yasyasti Bhagavatiya Kinchana Bhakti Sarvai Gunas Tatra Samasate Sura Haro Abhaktasya Kuto Mahat Guna Manorathen Asato Davato Bahi. A person who is not in Krishna consciousness has no good qualifications. However so-called gentleman one may be, or academically educated he may be, he is hovering over the mental plane, and therefore he must commit nuance, being influenced by the external energy. A person who has, however, unflinching faith in the Supreme Personality of Godhead has all the good qualifications of the demigods. In other words, you should not keep your trust on so-called gentlemen of the world, however nicely dressed he may be. In the matter of discharging our mission of Krishna consciousness, we have to meet so many so-called gentlemen, but we must be very cautious for dealing with them, as we are cautious in dealing with serpents. So Srila Prabhupada, after communicating with Mr. Goldsmith, the lawyer, who informed him that legally he had a very slim chance of getting the money back, Prabhupada is now bringing it to the transcendental platform that you've made a mistake, and the lesson to learn from this is that people who are not Krishna conscious, they have no good qualities. They're simply hovering on the mental platform, the manoratena. But those who are Krishna conscious, they have all the good qualities of the demigods. So this was the lesson he wanted his disciples to learn, that when dealing with non-Krishna conscious people, no matter how well dressed, no matter how wealthy they appear to be, they should be dealt with, what does he say here? Like serpents, right? Dealing with them as we are cautious in dealing with serpents. So it's a big lesson for each one of these disciples to learn. Now more than ever, the boys in New York wanted Swamiji to come back. Although most of the talk in the temple was still about real estate, they were holding regular kirtan and lecture programs, and 2 new boys had joined. Very good sign. Even without Prabhupada being physically present, they were attracting boys to become Krishna conscious. Jadharani had finished some new paintings of Lord Vishnu, which now hung in the temple, and she was waiting anxiously for Swamiji to come and see them. Some devotees had made a new speaker's seat in the temple for Swamiji. They knew they were fools, but they asked him please to come back. He agreed. He set April 9th as the date for his return to New York, but meanwhile he still had much to do in San Francisco. One day, Malati hurried into Srila Prabhupada's apartment at his request. On his desk for his inspection, Shyam Sundar, her husband, had placed an item made in India that she had brought home from a store a few days before. "What is this, Swamiji?" Srila Prabhupada looked down and beheld a 3-inch wooden doll with a flat head, a black smiling face, and big round eyes. The figure had stubby forward jutting arms and a simple green and yellow torso with no visible feet. Srila Prabhupada immediately folded his palms and bowed his head, offering the little figure respects. "You have brought Lord Jagannath, the Lord of the universe," he said, smiling and bright-eyed. "He is Krishna. Thank you very much." Srila Prabhupada beamed with pleasure, while Malati and others sat amazed at their good fortune of seeing Swamiji so pleased. Prabhupada explained that this was Lord Jagannath, a deity of Krishna, worshipped all over India for thousands of years. Jagannath, he said, is worshipped along with 2 other deities, his brother Balaram and his sister Subhadra. So in other books that have been written, such as Shyam Sundar's book, Chasing Rhinos with the Swami, it's explained that San Francisco, it's on the shore of the Pacific Ocean, and there are piers where the exports come in. And from one of the boats, there were barrels. And the barrels had these little figurines. There were barrels of the black one, of the yellow one, of the white one. All these little figurines. So Malati, what she did was she did what's called 5-finger discount. 5 fingers, you discount like this. It's called a 5-finger discount. And that's what she brought to Srila Prabhupada, and Shyam Sundar brought it to put it on Prabhupada's desk, and now is their conversation. Excitedly, Malati confirmed that there were other similar figures at Cost Plus, the import store where she had found the little Jagannath, and Srila Prabhupada said she should go back and get them. Prabhupada then asked if anyone knew how to carve. Shyam Sundar said he was a wood sculptor, and Prabhupada asked him to carve 3-foot-high copies of Jagannath, Baladev, Balaram, and Subhadra. So Malati and Shyam Sundar hurried back and got the other 2 dolls in the set. These are the ones that he carved. Srila Prabhupada placed the black-faced, smiling Jagannath on the right. In the center, he placed the smallest figure, Subhadra, who had a red, smiling mouth and a rectangular black and yellow torso. The third figure, Balaram, with a white round head, red-rimmed eyes, and a happy red smile, had the forward jutting arms like Jagannath, and a blue and yellow base. Prabhupada placed him next to Subhadra. As Prabhupada looked at them together on his desk, he began to narrate their history. More than 2,000 years ago, Srila Prabhupada told them, there was a king named Indradumna, a devotee of Lord Krishna. Maharaj Indradumna wanted a statue of the Lord as he had appeared when he and his brother and sister had traveled on chariots to the holy field of Kurukshetra during a solar eclipse. When the king requested a famous artist from the heavenly planets, Vishvakarma, to sculpture the forms, Vishvakarma agreed on the condition that no one interrupt his work. The king waited for a long time while Vishvakarma worked behind locked doors. One day, however, the king felt he could wait no longer, and he broke in to see the work in progress. Vishvakarma, true to his word, vanished, leaving behind the uncompleted forms of the three deities. The king was nevertheless so pleased with the wonderful forms of Krishna, Balaram, and Subhadra that he decided to worship them as they were. He installed them in a temple and began worshiping them with great opulence. Since that time, Srila Prabhupada continued, Lord Jagannath has been worshipped all over India, especially in the province of Orissa, where there is a great temple of Lord Jagannath at Puri. Each year at Puri, during the gigantic Ratha Yatra festival, millions of pilgrims from all over India come to worship Lord Jagannath, Balaram, and Subhadra, as the deities ride in procession on three huge carts. Lord Chaitanya, who spent the last 18 years of his life at Jagannath Puri, used to dance and chant in ecstasy before the deity of Lord Jagannath during the yearly Ratha Yatra festival. Seeing this appearance of Lord Jagannath in San Francisco as the will of Krishna, Prabhupada said that they should be careful to receive and worship Lord Jagannath properly. If Shyamasundar could carve the forms, Prabhupada said, he would personally install them in the temple, and the devotees could then begin worshiping the deities. San Francisco, he said, could be renamed New Jagannath Puri. He chanted, Jagannatha Swami Nayana Patagami Bhava Tume. That's from the Sri Jagannath Astakam. This is a mantra for Lord Jagannath, he said. Jagannath means Lord of the universe. O Lord of the universe, kindly be visible unto me. It is very auspicious that he has chosen to appear here. Shyamsundar obtained 3 large blocks of hard wood, and Prabhupada made a sketch and pointed out a number of details. So Shyamsundar explains in his book, Chasing Rhinos with the Swami, that you see, in California, there are the very ancient trees called the sequoia redwoods. And they're in the northern part of California where the weather is damp. And they grow so big that you can make tunnels through them for cars to drive through. Some of the trees are 5,000 years old. So when these trees fall over and die, because it's near the ocean, they get put into the ocean and they flow down and they come onto the sandbanks of San Francisco. So these big, big blocks of woods, the trunks of these trees you can find on the ocean shore. So he got these, and he used these to carve the deities. Prabhupada made a sketch and pointed out a number of details. Using the small statues, Shamsundar calculated ratios and new dimensions and began carving on the balcony of his apartment. Meanwhile, the devotees bought the rest of the tiny Jagannaths from Cost Plus, and it became a fashion to glue a little Jagannath to a simple necklace and wear him around the neck. So all the devotees had these little Jagannaths that they used to wear as necklaces. And I remember Subal, we had heard about Subal sometime earlier. He used to have a whole set of them that he worshipped. So all these early San Francisco devotees, they all were worshiping Lord Jagannath, either wearing them or they had all three of them and they were worshiping. We would make dresses for them and do different, small worship to them. And after Shamsundar carved these deities, Prabhupada had him carve deities for other temples, for the New York temple, for the Philadelphia temple, all the temples. Prabhupada was starting to expand the worship of Lord Jagannath from this first set of deities that were worshipped. Big, big deities, like 6-foot deities for New Vrindavan. We'll see pictures of them later. So this is the beginning of the worship of Lord Jagannath outside of Jagannath Puri, outside of India. Because Lord Jagannath was very liberal and merciful to the most fallen, Srila Prabhupada explained, the devotees would soon be able to worship him in their temple. Even in Jagannath Puri, we can remember that when Srila Prabhupada, when he was a young man in college, he had saved enough money and he was contemplating whether he should go to Puri or whether he should go to Vrindavan. Because it was less expensive to go to Puri, he went to Jagannath Puri first, and Prabhupada's father had a friend, one of the priests, and he took prasadam there, and mixed in the prasadam was fish or meat or something. So this is why Lord Jagannath is considered the most merciful, because even the meat eaters and the fish eaters, about at least 90% of the people in Orissa then were fish eaters and meat eaters, and they would get the Jagannath prasadam and mix it with their untouchable things also. But Lord Jagannath still accepted their worship. And we can remember in the history of Nilamadava, it was the pig keepers, the Sabaras, who were worshiping Nilamadava. And to this day, they still do the worship of Lord Jagannath. They're the ones who carry Lord Jagannath out of the temple to take part in the Rath Yatra. So Lord Jagannath is considered especially merciful to the mlechas and to the meat eaters and to those who are not on the standard of Brahminical life. The worship of the forms of Radha and Krishna in the temple required very high, strict standards. Later, Prabhupada would say that you had to have at least 7 initiated Brahmins before you could install Radha and Krishna, and they could not be installed in a rented house. It had to be a house a temple that we owned. Prabhupada at this time had not even begun giving Brahmin initiation. So no one was qualified for Radha Krishna worship at this time. But Lord Jagannath could be worshipped because he was so merciful. But Lord Jagannath was so merciful that he could be worshipped in a simple way, mostly by chanting Hare Krishna, even if the devotees weren't very much advanced. This is Golden Gate Park. Golden Gate Park, the Rath Yatras are the biggest outside of Jagannath Puri. They're the biggest in the world. Tens of thousands of people take part through the park, and then they have a huge feast and festival where the carts are parked. And now it's such a famous festival that they have a Rath Yatra day as a city holiday in San Francisco. Prabhupada set March 26th, the appearance day of Lord Chaitanya, as a day for installing the deities. You'll see Prabhupada here in the picture. This is during the installation when he's doing all the puja here. The devotees would have a big feast and begin worshipping Lord Jagannath. Prabhupada said they would have to build an altar, and he told them how to prepare it. While Shyam-Sundar hurried to finish his carving, a small splinter lodged itself in his hand, and the wound became infected. Finally, Shyam-Sundar got blood poisoning and became so sick that he had to go to the hospital. Lord Jagannath was taking away the reactions to Shyam-Sundar's previous sinful activities, Prabhupada said. So if any of you have the time, you can read Chasing Rhinos with the Swami. You can read about all of Shyam-Sundar's previous activities. And he was put in jail for some type of drug offense. He was put in jail. He was supposed to stay in jail for 5 years, and they let him out of jail because he had become a devotee. So here now Prabhupada is saying that Lord Jagannath was taking away the reactions to Shyam-Sundar's previous sinful activities. So sometimes we hear that due to our past sinful activities, we should get our hand cut off, but instead we just get a little pinprick when we take to Krishna consciousness. On March 26th, the appearance day of Lord Chaitanya, Prabhupada said that during the morning they would stay together in the temple, read about Lord Chaitanya, and hold kirtan. And in the evening, they would have a ceremony for installing Lord Jagannath. Having fasted until moonrise, they would then break fast with a prasadam feast. So we had heard about how Srila Prabhupada had taught the devotees how to observe Sri Krishna Janmashtami. He had them sit all day chanting and reading in the temple until midnight, and then they were allowed to have the feast. Some of the devotees couldn't do it that long. Now it was only going to be till moonrise, and then they would have a prasadam feast. So here this is how they would set up the feasts in the temple, and Prabhupada was there overseeing the feast. When Srila Prabhupada entered the temple that morning, he saw the work done, the work the devotees had done. The new altar stood in the rear of the room, above where his dais had been, and his dais was now on the right side of the room, against the wall. From his seat, he would be able to see the altar very easily. The altar was a simple red wood plank 7 feet above the floor and fixed between 2 thick redwood pillars. So there were 3 sections to the altar. The top section we see is Jagannath, Baladev, and Subhadra. And then below that is Guru Gauranga altar, the Panchatattva, that's the picture that used to hang over Prabhupada. They now put that on the altar. And they had Srila Prabhupada and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And now they moved Kartamashi onto the altar there, on the lower portion. And there also on the third portion, that's where they had all of the articles for worship. Later, Prabhupada would introduce everyone offering a candle. We'll hear how Prabhupada gradually introduces deity worship into ISKCON. We can see everything from a different angle here. A canopy covered the place where the deities would stand. Below the altar hung Haridas's painting of Lord Chaitanya and his associates dancing during kirtan. And behind the painting was a madras backdrop. About 3 feet above the floor, a shelf below the painting held candlesticks and would be used for articles to be offered to the deities. So gradually the devotees, they were learning how to worship nicely. Although no one had Brahminical initiation, Prabhupada now for the first time was installing Lord Jagannath. Already they had Kartamashi, they had Panchatattva, and they were learning how to express their devotion through their worship. Prabhupada took his seat. As usual, he led kirtan and then chanted 1 round of japa with the devotees. Then he had Hayagriva read aloud from the biographical sketch of Lord Chaitanya from the first volume of Srimad Bhagavatam. So this is a very important part of the Srimad Bhagavatam. You'll see it's even in our present first canto. It's the life sketch or the life biography of Lord Chaitanya. Before you even start reading the Srimad Bhagavatam, you read the entire life story of Lord Chaitanya. So, because I was already in Prabhupada's Srimad Bhagavatam, that's what Hayagriva was reading from. But many devotees were sleepy, despite Hayagriva's reading loudly with force and elocution. Although Prabhupada was listening attentively and wanted the others to sit with him and hear about Lord Chaitanya, when he saw that so many were dozing, he stopped the reading and held another kirtan. Then he chanted japa with them for about 15 minutes. This is the devotees for the first time in San Francisco trying to fast for a whole day. Here you can see Jamuna, and that's Jayananda. All right, he said, we will read again. Who will read? Lilavati's hand flew up urgently. All right, he had her sit near his dais, and someone placed a microphone before her. Lilavati's reading presented a contrast to the deep tones of Hayagriva, but she was another scholarly voice. Her careful pronunciation of the Sanskrit words and phrases was pleasing to Srila Prabhupada, and he several times commented, "Oh, very nice." Lilavati was thrilled and read on intensively, determined to keep everyone awake. That evening, devotees and hippie guests filled the room to capacity. Prabhupada was present, and the mood was reverential and festive. It was a special event. The just-finished deities sat on the altar, and everyone was glancing at them as they stood on their redwood shelf beneath a yellow canopy, their features illumined by spotlights. The deities wore no clothes or ornaments, but were freshly painted in bright black, red, white, green, yellow, and blue. In this picture, it must be a later picture, they have dresses on. Maybe in the early pictures, here they don't have any dresses on. This one they've learned how to put dresses on the deities. They were smiling. Srila Prabhupada was also glancing at them, looking up to their high altar. Prabhupada lectured about the 4 social and 4 spiritual orders of life described in the Vedic literatures. According to one's quality and work, he said, each person has a certain occupational duty. But the ultimate goal of that duty, he explained, is to satisfy the Supreme Lord. It doesn't matter if one is low-born or poor. Material qualification has nothing to do with spiritual evolution. Spiritual evolution is that with your talent, with your capacity, with your work, you have to satisfy the Supreme Lord. So now we have a perfect example by the building of this altar and the carving of the deities by Shyam Sundar. This was the first altar that Shyam Sundar made. So because he was a sculptor, he was able to make this altar so beautifully. He was able to sculpt the deities. And that's exactly what Prabhupada's saying here. With your talent, with your capacity, with your work, you have to satisfy the Supreme Lord. So Prabhupada was encouraging the devotees at that time to get jobs. For instance, Jayananda, though he was an engineer, he was driving a taxi. And he would chant Hare Krishna while he was driving the taxi. And he would bring the money and give that for the temple to be the rent and all of the other expenses. So the devotees also, we heard that Upendra, he would work until midnight in the post office, because post office work goes on 24 hours a day. Then he would come home and he would sleep with Prabhupada, and he would hear Prabhupada doing his translations all night as his personal servant. So all the devotees will hear later when Vishnu Jan and Tamal Krishna and Guru Das, each one of them according to their capacities. Vishnu Jan, he was carving flutes and selling the flutes. Guru Das was a photographer, so he worked as a photographer. And in that way, whatever capacity, whatever talent they had, they were using in Krishna's service, and whatever money they were able to collect, they were using that also in Krishna's service. This is the perfection of karma yoga, as described in Bhagavad-Gita. Prabhupada gave the example of Sridhar, an impoverished devotee of Lord Chaitanya, who earned the equivalent of less than 5 cents a day, yet offered half his earnings in worship of the Ganga. If one were rich, however, one should still give half his wealth to the service of the Lord. Prabhupada cited Rupa Goswami, who had given 50% of his wealth for Krishna consciousness, given 25% for his family, and saved 25% for emergencies. So gradually Prabhupada was introducing, although he was speaking to an audience of hippies who had no money. I remember when I first heard this, because this is, once Prabhupada described this 50%, 25%, 25%, Subal, he gave the same lecture. Because whatever we would hear from Prabhupada, we would speak again. So when I heard it, I said to Subal, well, okay, I'm going to give my 50%. And we went to the bank together, and I gave my 50%, $200. And Prabhupada, Subal immediately sent that money to Prabhupada. And he said, a very nice girl has joined, and here's $200, and can we please now have Radha and Krishna deities? So then I was thinking, well, wait a minute, what am I going to do with the other 50%? So then I had him take me back to the bank, and I gave the rest of the money. Because we didn't have family, we didn't have emergencies, we were devotees by that time, so why keep the other 50%? So just by Prabhupada introducing this, that was more and more devotees, they understood then the principle of giving to Krishna. Suddenly Prabhupada began speaking about the money his disciples in New York had lost. Prabhupada, even though it was Lord Chaitanya's appearance day, he was obviously, meditating about his disciples. And 25% for himself, so that in times of emergency, because as soon as money is gone out of my hand, I have no control. We have recently lost $6,000. Not here, in our New York. So as soon as the check is out of hand, now it is gone. It is gone. Prabhupada wasn't lamenting. He didn't fall into lamentation. He was using this as a lesson for his disciples, how they have to strictly follow his instructions, otherwise failure. Prabhupada gestured to indicate money flying like a bird out of his hand. At this reference to the troubling, entangling affair with Mr. Price and the foolish boys and their hard-earned money gone, Prabhupada paused for a moment. Then he continued with the lecture. Now, we had heard when Prabhupada would take his walk, we had a map showing where the temple was and which roads Prabhupada would take, how we would enter Golden Gate Park and there would be a duck pond, and then a tunnel, and then the hippie hill. So what they did was they brought Kartamashi to the duck pond, and they made a beautiful scenery like Vrindavan there. Paying attention to Bhagavan, the Supreme Person, is practical, Srila Prabhupada said. Paying attention to Bhagavan, the Supreme Person, is practical. Here is Krishna. Krishna's form is there. Krishna's color is there. Krishna's helmet is there. Krishna's advice is there. Krishna's instruction is there. Krishna's sound is there. Everything Krishna, everything Krishna. There is no difficulty. So Prabhupada was trying to help us become Krishna conscious. And the devotees were also trying their best to concentrate their mind on Krishna. Krishna is there because they had deities. There weren't any deities in New York at that time. All the deities were only in San Francisco now. But if you turn your attention to the impersonal, to the super soul in the heart, as the yogis do, then it is very difficult. It is very difficult. You cannot fix your attention to the impersonal. In the Bhagavad-Gita, it is said that klesho dadikaras dadikataras tesham avyakta shakta chetasam. Those who are attached to the impersonal feature of the absolute truth, their business is very troublesome. So now that the form of the Lord had been introduced in the deity worship, it was much easier for the devotees to concentrate on the beautiful forms of Krishna. They now had Lord Jagannath, they had the Panchatattva, they had Kartamashi, and they had articles of worship also. So they were learning very gradually, step by step, how to become Krishna conscious through now this process of archana. It is not like chanting, dancing, and this is very nice, but that is very troublesome. That means it is not meaning the impersonal path, because that's very troublesome. Devotees, they become self-realized and attain spiritual perfection by chanting, dancing, and eating. But the impersonalist, as Lord Brahma describes in the Brahma Samhita, for thousands of years you can move with at the speed of the mind and still not reach Krishna Loka. But simply by chanting and dancing and feasting, you can become Krishna conscious through the bhakti-yoga process. And even if you speculate on the impersonal, the result that is achieved by working hard for many, many lives is that you will have to also eventually come to Krishna. So Prabhupada explains that in his letters around this time, that even those who attain the Brahmajyoti, because their senses are not engaged in activity, and the senses naturally want to be active, they come down again to the material platform. They open hospitals, they open schools, because the senses have to be active. So from the Brahmajyoti, you don't necessarily go up to the spiritual world. You go to the spiritual world through the process of bhakti-yoga. That means engaging all the senses and the mind in Krishna's service. Oh, so we'll stop here because it's after 7 o'clock. Here again we have Kartamashi in the middle of the lake now. They're really trying to become Krishna conscious. And maybe by reading about this, we'll also become Krishna conscious. Hare Krishna. Jai.